Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get started, I wanted to thank you for watching this video, and I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button before you leave. If you really enjoy the content, consider subscribing to my channel. It's growing. I'm putting out 2 or 3 videos per week, and I think it has a lot of valuable content. So for today's project, we're going to do something that, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call kind of a wideband minimalist ring. It features a faceted stone in a random position on an upward facing circle that's on top of the finger, and it's a pretty cool ring, and I think I've modified it a little bit to make it even better. So I hope you enjoy this video and find it useful. So here's one of these that I made a while back. My wife snatched this one up. I think this might have been the very first one I made. I've made a couple since then, and I've never really been super pleased with the way they came together here, so I've made some modifications on the way I'm cutting this band here, and we'll see how it comes out. I'm eager to see whether it's an improvement or not, but overall I think the ring is a pretty cool looking ring from the top side. It kind of reminds me of some of Kandinsky's art as far as the concentric circle things. So let's see what we can do as far as getting it to look a little bit cleaner than this one. So I've in advance, just to save some time, I made some little templates to use for the sheet I'm going to cut out. In the previous ones, I just did a rectangle like this with straight ends, and then I soldered it to another ring that was up on top here like this, and then I dremeled out part of the curve to make it more of a circle around your finger. But this time we're going to try and compensate with a little bit of a change in the design here. I've curved the top just slightly inwards, and I've made the band curve inwards like this too. So I'm shooting for about an 8.5 size-wise, and so what I did was I cut it to an 8.5 fully, and then I lined it up on top of this little piece that I made and looked at it on the mandrel, kind of like this, to see where it would come to about the right spot where an 8.5 would fall. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot and a little bit of a guessing game, but I think we'll get it pretty close, and if we need to, we can always cut the bottom and shorten it. I'm guessing if it comes out the wrong size, it's going to be slightly large. So let's get started on this. So I've already cut this to the right length, or at least marked it to the right length. For this one, it came out to be about, I guess I didn't mark it on this one, but it was about 2 1/8 inches, I think. So I'm going to mark this off that way, if I can get it to lay down flat. 2 1/8 is about to right there, from here to here. So I'll make a mark there. And that'll be how long of a piece of sheet that I use for this. And I'm going to use a pretty thick sheet here. I'm going to use 18 gauge sterling silver sheet. And it looks like I have a good sized piece right here on the corner I can take this off of. So I might just measure from the end there to get it to be the right length for this. And honestly, the circle on top can vary a little bit in size. It doesn't matter that much if it's within a range. Like I said, this one, for this particular ring, just eyeballing it, it looked like about 2 1/8 would be about right. So I think this is a pretty good width to start with, maybe slightly thinner than this. You don't want to have too much material to remove. So I'm going to go just a little thinner than that. Maybe like that. Comes out to be a little more than 1/4 of an inch, maybe 5/16 or something like that, thereabouts. So let's measure down here, same distance in-ish. Okay, so that'll get me about where I need on the circle, I think. So I think I'm going to use, I don't really like these tin snips because they leave teeth marks, but I'm going to cut it just a slightly bigger than it needs to be, and then I'll trim it down with some shears that are a little neater on the cut. These little Fisker's shears surprisingly will cut through 18 gauge. However, I'm guessing that it probably shortens the lifespan of them, because they're not really meant to be used to cut this kind of thick stuff. However, for me, the cost of having to use the saw to cut out things like this is far more expensive in my mind than going through a few of these over the years. So, but that gets it pretty close there. I'm going to do a little filing to clean it up, and then we'll go ahead and make it into a circle. Just like any time I'm soldering a silver circle, I generally make it into a U shape. The reason I do that, if you haven't seen this in my other videos, is that it's much easier to solder two like 90-degree perfectly straight surfaces than it is to try and figure out the angle you have when you have a curve like this. So if you file them just perfectly, I guess it would be perpendicular to this and to that dimension, then you can just put the two ends together nicely, solder them. They solder really neatly this way, and then after you remove the excess solder, then you just round it out, and I find that way to be a little bit, give me a little bit nicer result. I'm going to use a little garnet for this, for the stone in this one. I like garnets. Garnets are pretty. When I'm soldering on the inside of something like this, sometimes it's kind of a good idea to tip it over after it flows. We're heating from above, and so the solder tends to follow the heat. In this case, there was no way to heat below it when I had it setting on the pad like that. So once the solder is in place, if I go ahead and heat the whole thing again with it on its side like this, and if there's any places where it hasn't pulled through that seam completely, once it flows again, if I'm pointing the heat from the outside, it definitely will pull it through the rest of the way. It's a good trick in a lot of situations. Now I'm just going to spend a little time cleaning up the solder on the inside, and then we'll round it out. Okay, we're going to do something like this. So, let's cut out a little rectangle here. So I'm going to cut this rectangle out, and then I think what I'll do is I will tape this down on here, and then I should be able to use the jeweler saw to go along those things, even though it's not my favorite thing to do in the world. Flatten this back out a little bit. Sometimes when I have to do a template like this, I'll use rubber cement. My rubber cement dried up, so I'm just going to tape it on here this time. And then I may use a marker or something to trace it, in case it moves on me. Okay, so I've got that taped down. And just for giggles, probably cut out these parts with the jeweler saw. I might just use the Dremel to grind those into that curve. Might be easier than that. So let's do some sawing. Okay, so time to do some sawing. Not my favorite thing, but still something that's got to be done once in a while. So let me get this started here. Do it on the other side here. Okay, so I think, like I said, I'm going to Dremel these ends a little bit just to kind of carve them with the Dremel rather than do that. So I did a little dremeling on the edges here to kind of make them slightly curved. Now we'll see if we can get this to kind of shape the way we want it to. I think to start with, let's pull it around the mandrel like this. If you need to, you can use a hammer. Kind of straight up and down like that, but we're dealing with 3 dimensions, so we have to start doing some things, making this go in ways that we might not want to necessarily go in. So I'm going to bend this in just a little bit like this. We got to get it curved in enough to match the curve of this, so go a little bit further. I'm going to get it to where it sits right on there like that. And when we do, I think what I'm going to do is file this, make sure we get it nice and flat. So really the next step will be figuring out a way to position this so I can solder that on there like that. I may need to use a third hand to do this. Okay. Guess we'll find out if that's positioned good. Notice I'm doing one side first in order to get it seated in position, and then I'll be able to bend the other side more easily because it won't be flopping around on both sides then, which makes it harder to control things. These guys to match up. In order to get this touching the other one, I'm going to have to kind of push it past a little bit. So I'm going to try not to get my circle to be no longer round, but I've got to get a grab on it somewhere where I can push it up like that, so that when I pull it back it's going to be springing upwards and pushing against that top piece. Otherwise you'll have trouble getting that to solder together. Should be able to just balance it like that now for the second one. I guess we'll find out for sure. Now, I'm going to have to do a little bit of cleaning up on the Dremel here. This curve is going to go up into this band here a little bit. So, it's mostly just carving and shaping with the Dremel. First, let's get this a little closer around. Okay, I'll be back after I do a little dremeling and I'll show you what the end result kind of looks like here. A little bit of cleanup on the Dremel, smooth this out. You can see how where it was kind of elongated, I've kind of rounded this top part into the band just slightly to make it a little more round. And then I think what I'm going to do is, I got quite a bit of material to remove up here. I made this a little bit taller than I probably should have, so I'm going to take it down quite a bit. So bear with me while I file. So you can see I took it down quite a bit. Now we need to make a bezel for our stone that we're going to put in here, which is, as I said, this little garnet here. So find some bezel material here. Keep picking up my crummy tweezers. Just going to do a little shaping. So years ago when I started doing this, bezels were just my nemesis. There's so many ways to screw them up when you first are a beginner. And so I usually tell people it takes about 30 bezels before you become relatively proficient at it, and you rarely have any problems after that. So just as a rule of thumb, don't give up until you've made at least 30 bezels. Okay, for this one I'm doing a faceted stone, so I'm going to put some jump rings in the bottom of this bezel in order to raise the level of the stone up to where I want it to be. I'm going to find a little 18 gauge round, which I think I just did. Cut myself a little piece of this. I think for this one I may need 3 layers just to get it up high, because I want it to sit high so I can just have just a little bit of bezel sitting above this, because I'm going to mount it somewhere on the inside of this band here. I think I'm going to do 3 for this one. doing these, you really want to make sure they're sitting flat in the bezel, otherwise you're going to have a crooked platform for your stone to sit on. Use quite a bit of solder here. What you do is you just set it right on top of it like that. I'm going to file the bottom flat. It ends up looking pretty clean on the bottom like that. We could do it a number of ways. I think probably the easiest way, let's try it like this. Push this down. And we got to figure out kind of where I want it to sit. I really like to sit not square, but somewhere a little bit offset, just to make it a little more artsy. So let's go kind of about there. See, I made a little mark where I can kind of position it like that. Probably, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a little solder on the side of this, just to make sure I have enough solder. There's probably some solder there that'll run when I do this, but I want to make sure there's enough to get a good solid attachment there. When you pre-melt some solder onto something so it's in the right place, it's called sweat soldering. See how it, you can always see when it actually gets hot enough to attach. Well, you could if I had better resolution on my video. Still working on that. Alright. Flex him a little bit. Most of the mass is in the band on this one, so most of the flame needs to be applied to the band more than the rest of it. Looks like we got that on pretty straight, about the right height. So while it's hot, I'm going to throw it in the pickle. We'll let that clean up for a bit, and then we can set the stone and polish it, and you can see our final ring. So stay tuned for a little bit. Okay, pickled for a while. I cleaned it up a little bit with the Dremel. Did much of the polishing on the inside that I was going to do, just to save some time later. So let's see how the stone sits in here. Sits pretty good. It just needs to, I need to take the just a little bit too much bezel sticking up over the stone still. I just need enough to get over the girdle of the stone, which is the widest part of the stone. So what that means is I need to file just a little bit. When you're doing one of these, if you ever file too far down, oops. When you're doing one of these, if you ever file too far down, you can take a small ball burr on your Dremel or on your rotary tool and take out a little bit of that top ring so that the stone sits a little deeper, and that way it fixes it if you get a little aggressive in your filing. So I've had to do that a few times. Okay, let's see if we can get this guy to set. Always give those a little poke from behind to make sure they're seated well. Now I just need to do some polishing, and then I'll bring you back the final product. So I finished polishing, and that's the final ring. I think I'm pleased with the geometry of this one. I made the top ring a little bit smaller on this one than the original one I had tried, and also if you notice how tall and elongated this band is on this first one, I think I achieved a more round kind of shape with this one, and I think it merges more nicely than the original one. So I think that adding that little extra curve outwards and the slight bend helped. So, all right, I'll take a nicer picture to post at the end. But that's the video.